This is the Tesoro AI podcast with Darius Gant. AI is changing the world and fast. This episode is coming to you courtesy of Tesoro AI, the #1 recruiting service for software development and AI talent.
All right, Gerald, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking some time out to join us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, we'd love to learn more about your background, right? I mean, you've got some startup experience and now you're leading your own startup. But if we kind of go even earlier than that, we'd love to learn more about, who you are, your professional background, and kind of your lead up to what you have. Well, let's not steal your thunder here.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in AI as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks again for having me. I usually say that my story starts in Puerto Rico. Despite my name and my appearance, I'm originally from just outside of San Juan and grew up in the island. Went to school in Ohio for reasons unknown, and studied entrepreneurship and political science, and eventually ended up in DC with this kind of desire to be in the diplomacy, international relations side. Did a little bit of work there, but realized that you get exposed to really interesting things. You don't necessarily learn a lot of hard skills. And so eventually ended up joining a company at the time called the Corporate Executive Board, CEB, big consultancy, now part of Gardner. And then eventually joined a company called FiscalNote. And that's where my AI journey began. FiscalNote was essentially an AI startup at the time that was applying AI on top of laws and regulations and helping enterprises and government agencies understand the impact of laws inside of their organizations. And so I spent 8.5 years at the company. We went public in the New York Stock Exchange in 2022 and had a great ride, really loved it. We were starting to see the impact of regulations in AI. We were starting to see that with the, democratization of AI through ChatGPT and other tools, that more and more people were using AI, which meant more and more people were now responsible for understanding what it meant for their organizations and how it should be governed inside of organizations, and that the process of AI governance was going to get a lot more complex. And so we started Trustable as an AI governance software company to really help orgs understand how to develop and deploy AI responsibly and comply with some of the emerging regs that we're seeing for AI.
Yeah, and at FiscalNote, if you read your bio, right, it's not like, hey, I was a software engineer or data scientist, and that was my entry into, AI, fiscal and product marketing manager, and then eventually moved into more of a focus on AI, I guess, for you. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, by the way. For you, as you got deeper into AI, what was it like to kind of become more technical? Was it a matter of reading papers? Did you jump in, figure out how to do some basic code? Like, what was your process for becoming more steeped on the AI specific side?
Yeah, I'm not technical in the sense that I'm not a developer, but certainly I think working at an AI company, at a data company like FiscalNote, and I had a lot of different roles too. So I served for a very brief period of time in sales. I led our customer success team. I became chief of staff to our CEO. I was doing M&A and corporate development, and then eventually I became the general manager of our AI line of business. And I think, in essence, for me, with each new role, there's new learnings and opportunities, right? So it's always, you're starting from zero. It's kind of an active learning process. But for me, I also learned from conversations with folks. Right. So while I did read a lot of papers, oftentimes where I would gain the most insight and clarity was actually talking to our chief scientist or getting connected with individual data scientists or machine learning engineers. During this period, I got, very close, both from a friendship standpoint and from a professional standpoint, with my now co-founder, Andrew, who was our lead, essentially AI ML engineer for the organization. So I think I started getting just really interested in the work that they were doing. And I think as part of that curiosity, started just naturally learning more about AI.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly interesting because, look, you got the experience inside of FiscalNote, but I know there are a lot of folks, especially today, who are like, hey, look, I would love to figure out how I can work with AI, be a part of the growth of this AI ecosystem, but I don't really want to go back and get, do a master's program or learn how to code. So just to kind of see that, look, there are other approaches to actually having a position within AI, and you yourself are a co-founder and CEO of an AI startup. And so there's different entry points versus purely going in from a technical perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, look, I did a couple of Coursera courses. There's a lot of universities that offer online courses as well, some free, some paid. I really do encourage folks to do those things, particularly if you're trying to get more competency on AI. You know, the advice that a lot of folks will say is, oh, play around with ChatGPT and whatnot. And that's certainly important, but I think it's also important to note that AI is a very broad technology. It can be used for a variety of different purposes. There's different techniques around computer vision and machine learning and others that have their own sets of intricacies and challenges. And so I think getting a broad exposure and then identifying specifically where in AI you want to play, I think is also something that someone gave me some advice on. I really appreciated that.
Yeah, nice. That seems to be kind of the big question. I get people who reach out to me now. Hey, look, I don't have any intention on coding, but I do want to get up to speed on AI. Can you send me some resources? So definitely.
Yeah. Well, AI may make coding obsolete in a few years, so we'll see.
Yeah, so I hear.
Probably not, but
I see. I saw the Devin, and I'm sure there'll be other platforms that come out soon. Okay, so Trustable. AI governance is the space that you're in, but just thinking about this AI ecosystem, what was the pain point that you saw in the market where you were saying, hey, look, I need to develop a solution to solve whatever the issue is?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, there were a few different ones, right? I think the first is the regulatory environment for AI is shifting. Many applications of AI, particularly those that are, let's call them high risk, right? Things that might impact your employment, your financial services, your healthcare, things like that. Their development life cycle will look much more like a drug is developed, where they have to go through product safety and reviews before they actually reach, commercial market. And the EU AI Act, the big regulation in the European Union that is similar to their data privacy regulation, but for AI, is going to essentially change the way that many AI systems get developed. And so the big pain point that, we were seeing is it's not immediately clear how a machine learning engineer or data scientist is supposed to take this law and operationalize it inside of their organization. Right. And moreover, it's not just the fact that machine learning engineers need to solve for bias. It's the fact that they have to work with their legal compliance risk teams that oftentimes don't even know how to define or measure bias, mm-hmm. and are now being asked to participate in evaluating AI systems. And so the big pain point that we're trying to solve is, how do we help these technical and non-technical stakeholders that are working together to make sure that they're working off of the same assumption? So our software platform essentially does three things. We can help you measure and manage the benefits and risks of the different AI systems you're building. We can help you comply with emerging regulations. And then we have a series of responsible AI best practices, insights, guidance to help you essentially understand what you should be doing to make sure that you're deploying these systems responsibly.
Yeah, I just thinking about building technology generally, it's like if you're looking at traditional software, deterministic software, whenever you build and deploy, you've got, a QA team that then goes in and runs all these tests, right? But on the AI side, you've got the data scientists, machine learning engineers who are basically evaluating their own work, right? So it seems like there's a bit of conflict of interest there, I built it. Do I really want to? And this thing needs to go out ASAP because the client is demanding it. So, how aggressively do I want to critique it for bias? I always found that to be an interesting challenge on the AI side. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a critical issue, right? I think before the generative AI craze, something like only 10% of AI initiatives actually reached production. Mm-hmm. A lot of it was experimentation and data analytics oriented work that didn't actually see customers' hands or dramatically improve efficiency or whatnot. So I think for the most part, data science was kind of by design operating a little bit in a silo where they wanted to do experimentation and ways in which they can drive, different parts of the business forward. I think we're starting to see that, with generative AI and chatbots and agents, everyone is a data scientist, whether they know it or not, right? Or at least they have the capacity to implement these types of systems into their everyday life. But I think you're exactly right. There isn't really a QA and audits, a third party review of different systems, I think that's certainly going to change. Well, let me actually say this. I think it has been true for regulated sectors, right? Financial services after the Great Recession had model risk management obligations enforced by the Federal Reserve. We saw that healthcare and insurance industries have been using AI for claims and underwritings and loans and all sorts of things. And I think they do recognize that there are existing biases and fairness issues in these systems. And I do believe that they've been trying to solve it with the right intent. Mm-hmm. I just think that this process is complex enough and it requires not just technical acumen, but social, technical, and humanitarian or ethical or acumen that I think is oftentimes missing from a lot of organizations.
Yeah. And you mentioned three specific things your product does. One was around responsible AI. The other was around compliance with regulation. Yep. And then what was the last one?
Yeah, it's essentially around measuring the benefits and the risks of AI systems. So that can mean a lot of different things, but let me share what we're hearing from organizations that are deploying AI, right? So one is, particularly if you're large, you don't always know where AI is being used, right? Different teams might be using it in different ways. And so getting visibility of where AI is being used is critical. Maps back to, we have an AI inventory where you can centralize all the use cases of AI. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that you need to conduct, in essence, like risk assessments, right? What are these being used for? How can they go wrong? What type of system are they? What data is going into them? And so what we see is that orgs, in order to justify the use of AI, what they're saying is, okay, let me measure the benefits, right? What are the benefits to users or to the company? And then what are the potential risks? And then with those two things, I have more data to help validate the business case behind this AI project or AI use case or initiative. And so that's why we say measuring the benefits and risks is we essentially have taxonomies and risk management capabilities that can help you gain a better understanding of where these systems might benefit or might risk your org and what you need to do about it.
Yeah. And so when you think about risk, is it defined on the customer side, or is it something you're saying, okay, well, generally, what are the general risks to AI? And then we're going to present to you where we think the risks may exist.
So part of our promise to customers is that we are, in essence, keeping tabs of both responsible AI research and the developments of AI, in addition to the policy requirements and the regulatory environment. So there are specific guidelines as to what things qualify as high, medium, or low risk in different scenarios. Some of the definitions are murky, but there's something there. But I think we ourselves are taking essentially the initiative to both provide a taxonomy of risks. So we have a taxonomy with several dozen types of categories of risks that users can essentially add to their platform. And then we have recommended mitigation techniques. And then we have different ratings, right? So, hey, we think this presents risks to the performance of the system. This has ethical risks, cybersecurity risks, privacy risks. These might be risks that impact different stakeholder groups, right? Maybe this is not a risk for your organization, but it is a risk for the user that's going to be interacting with the system. And so we help orgs understand these nuances in a very simplified way.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful because, you got folks who are trying to use AI internally, right? It's a little bit more challenging. For example, as a large enterprise, hey, we're going to have this public deployment of AI using our own data. But even internally, there are some risks. You may want to prevent someone from querying some conversational AI, right, and getting access to internal information that they shouldn't otherwise have access to. See, I was curious, kind of the scope of, when you think about risk, what is the scope of risk that Trustable is trying to help the organization with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we help orgs understand what types of risks may exist. We help with some risk mitigation efforts. Some others are very technical that they may have to do inside of their environments. But in general, we help orgs understand what could even go wrong. What do I need to do about it, right? And that's where we see that a lot of orgs are unsure of, I would say, what to do.
Okay. And then once you've identified the risk, is there a mitigation element to it? Or is that for the company to just say, all right, well, now that we actually, we had no clue before, but now that we understand, here's where we put together a plan to mitigate the actual risk.
Absolutely. So this is really critical, right? It's what is the AI what are the potential risks and what can I do to mitigate those potential risks? So we, alongside our taxonomy of risk, each of those different risks comes with recommended measurement and mitigation techniques for you to essentially be able to know what to do after the fact, right? And so, for example, some issues where there are bias or fairness issues may require you to do some testing and evaluation on your model to detect and fix the issue. Some issues might be more ethical or legal in nature, and they may require non-technical mitigation efforts, right? So we've essentially created also, I think of it as almost like an inventory of mitigation techniques around different risk categories and very essentially providing recommendations, right? So, hey, if I'm building, a system based on a large language model that's going to be deployed in a particular jurisdiction that does not allow me to collect certain data, okay, then what are the issues that might exist there and what do I need to do about it?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that helps. That helps. And then you mentioned responsible AI. I mean, there's a lot of conversation around, I would say the terminology is used often, but what is responsible AI? What does that mean?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the word has been overused and underdefined. So the way that I look at responsible AI, it is essentially that you have a very accurate understanding of where and how AI is being used, and you have a thoughtful process to review and improve various systems of AI. It's oftentimes not sexy because we talk about responsible AI as being fair, transparent, safe, private. I think these attributes are important, but they're just principles, right? How you bring this to fruition is really critical. And so what I'm seeing is that organizations are saying, I know what it means to be responsible, to me, to be fair and transparent, but I now need to go from responsible AI to accountable AI. Mm-hmm. I need to actually show my work, say it, do it, prove it. And so for us, responsible AI is now shifting into how do I demonstrate that I'm actually being private or that I'm actually being secure? Because oftentimes, we can't just take these as principles. We have to be able to operationalize it inside of our organizations and inside of our systems.
Yeah. And what does that look like? I mean, if I'm the customer, all right, great. One of your pillars is responsible or accountable AI. How does that look for us from okay, now I'm going to hold myself accountable? I'm just curious if I'm the customer, how do I understand that this is actually impactful coming from Trustable?
Well, look, I think I don't love using this terminology, but some of our customers have referred to us as like a stamp of approval in some respects where, we're helping you validate that your systems are safe. I think over time, we will likely see third-party audits play an important role. So this is much like there are third-party audits for cybersecurity, for example, if you are SOC 2 compliant or ISO 27001, we're already seeing that in AI. There is already frameworks that your companies can adopt that then will get attested by third-party auditors to help essentially validate that your system is safe. I think the challenge with AI is that, AI is a supply chain, right? There can be risks in your data, there can be risks in your models, there can be risks in the deployment process, or even after you've deployed it, there can be challenges. And so it's much more of an active process. And I would say oftentimes, again, the human dimension for me is so critical. So the example that I give to like my grandparents, for example, who they don't necessarily understand AI very well, but that's okay, is let's talk about the trolley example, right? Or with autonomous vehicles, so a clear example. An autonomous vehicle has, let's say, a couple of decisions that they see, pedestrians crossing the street. Let's say that one of the scenarios is, okay, we're going too fast and we can't stop, and we either, kill the pedestrians or we turn right and kill the driver. What do we do? Forever, that has just been a philosophical question, right? That you discussed in Philosophy 101 classes. Right. Now, someone's got to develop an answer to that.
Yeah.
And that is a human decision.
Right.
Of course, it is a statistical thing that you have to input in your models, but it is a fundamentally human decision. And so that's why the ethics is so important. The challenge is that the word ethics can mean different things in different contexts, right? In the healthcare space, you can have a do no harm obligation. In the defense space, you can have a harm obligation in some cases with your enemies. Both of them are acting ethically within their constructs, even though the outcomes are the exact opposite. And so that's why the word ethical AI is oftentimes a challenging word. Responsible AI has overtaken it. I think something will overtake responsible AI over time. Maybe AI governance, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So have you seen, I mean, I guess from that perspective, have you seen more adoption from larger organizations? You know, is this kind of an enterprise at this point, more of an enterprise ready solution, or are you also seeing kind of the startups trying to launch, you know, getting off on the right foot from a governance perspective?
You know, I think startups in particular will think a lot about whether their systems are meeting the performance objectives. They will try to take care of like the cybersecurity and privacy concerns, but oftentimes I don't necessarily think that the governance issue is one of their top priorities. I think we're much more seeing this across mid-market and enterprise organizations, where they might have regulatory risk that might
Right.
exist across different environments that they operate. They might operate in multiple jurisdictions that have contradictory requirements on how they can collect data or what they can do with their data. I think we're certainly seeing that a little bit more at the mid-market and enterprise level, where sometimes, again, you may not even have visibility of where AI is being used.
Yeah.
And so I think our platform is much more of a mid-market and an enterprise platform. I
Okay.
do think that over time, as startups that sell into enterprises
Right.
need to demonstrate that their systems are safe and secure, they'll use our platform as validation for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're probably still a couple of years away from that.
Okay, okay, makes sense. And then the other thing you mentioned is making sure, you know, folks remain in compliance with regulations. Are there specific regulations that it'd be great, you know, that companies should just, you know, be aware of, right? Or is this going to be something that's highly industry specific?
So I think both will be true. So there are regulations and standards. And let me talk first about regulations.
Mm-hmm.
So on the regulatory side, you have the EU AI Act, which I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Much like GDPR, the data protection regulation, this will likely have a global impact. It's what's called the Brussels effect, right? Because it can touch EU citizens anywhere around the world, organizations developing AI systems that are generally considered medium or high risk will have to go through certain compliance obligations to make sure that their products are in compliance with the EU AI Act. Whether they know it or not, American companies, global companies are going to have to comply with the AI Act, much like they had to comply with GDPR. I
Mm-hmm.
think what we're starting to see in the States is that there are federal agencies that are playing an important role within their industries. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, the SEC within finance, HHS within health and human services, the Department of Defense, et cetera. And then we're starting to see state regulatory activity, oftentimes guided towards, let's say, maybe government use of AI or specific industries like insurance that are highly regulated at the state level. And then we're seeing that every country has an opinion now on AI. You have to have a principle or something like that. And the geopolitical implications of your AI are starting to show in countries' policies. So the EU is taking very much a pro consumer protection, product safety approach towards AI. The US is taking very much an innovation approach towards AI, where it wants to help this industry blossom. And from a national security standpoint, it believes that it needs to retain leadership in AI. China is viewing this from a censorship standpoint, where they certainly don't want these AI systems to speak poorly of the Chinese Communist Party. And so we're starting to see a lot of geopolitical implications. So this is on the regulatory side, right? I think it's going to get complex and challenging and bifurcated. On the policies, on the standard side, so there are these independent standards organizations like the ISO and others that are creating frameworks for AI that essentially help orgs understand what they need to do to make sure that their products are at least safe in some capacity, right? So the cybersecurity space has a lot of these types of frameworks, FedRAMP and ISO 42001 and ISO 27001, SOC 2, these types of certifications that essentially say, hey, I've done all the things that I need to on my cyber side. Here's the report that shows cases. We're starting to see that emerge for AI. And this is important for buyers, right? This is what says, hey, I can trust this system because they have, the certification that is both in compliance and audited by third-party partners.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. And kind of as we think about the platform, the product itself, right? Theoretically, what you all are doing, if you had someone with infinite energy, they could go through and look through all of the instances where there may be some compliance issue, where there may be some regulatory risk, or how somebody may be able to implement better practices for responsible AI. But for you, as you all are implementing your own AI, like what is it actually doing that if we took a manual approach is not really possible?
I'll give you a perfect example. So we have actually an AI feature in our platform that's essentially GPT-4 under an Azure instance that in existing documentation from customers and provides an automated analysis or an automated gap analysis with existing regulations. So let me break that down. Regulations like the AI Act or standards like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework have a whole series of requirements that companies have to fill out, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have an approval or approver of your AI use cases? Do you have certain policies in place? Do you have an incident response plan? Things like this. And we've essentially unstructured each of these different requirements into mm-hmm. component questions and tasks and things that you need to do. And a customer can upload their existing AI policy, and we can use this LLM to interrogate that policy to automatically understand where there were gaps in their compliance. So I spoke to a customer the other day. They got quoted $20,000 from a law firm to do this exact work, to essentially say, hey, I'll take your policy and I'll figure out what things you need to have in it to comply with this regulation. And through this large language model, through our AI system, the customer was able to upload the document and do it within 2 minutes. So this is some of the areas that we're really starting to see. We talk a lot about summarization with AI, right, with LLMs, but interrogation is actually a really good use case where you can say, hey, here are things that are important within the prompt and validate that these things are present or not in these systems or these documents or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting because then you think about, you just used one document, but what happens when you have, thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents that you need to read through and test for compliance, or even just summarize and find gaps, right? And if I'm a financial services firm and I've got, thousands of credit agreements, right? There's no way to be weeding through all of that.
Yeah, this is where, these Gen AI models in particular, they're going to get more power hungry, right? They're going to need to expand their token limits. And this is going to be a challenge, I think, because customers are going to want greater and broader analysis. But the opposite is also true, where we're starting to see smaller language models, if you will, that are much more compute efficient and, more efficient on particular tasks that they're trained on.
Yeah. Any thoughts on hallucinations, right? Like in this example you gave around, we're going to summarize this document and then provide you an analysis around where the gaps are. How do you kind of make sure that the accuracy of what you are then returning to the client is, is real?
Yeah, this is a huge challenge and one of the major impediments in deploying generative AI across a lot of organizations, right? The issue of hallucination, of them being able to provide false or inaccurate information. So I'm seeing a couple of different things. Number one is this concept of human in the loop, where, you can use AI for internal purposes or for external purposes. If you use it for external purposes and there is a risk of hallucination, that is a big risk. And you need to think through how you can change your temperature parameters or perhaps explore a retrieval augmented generation or RAG model that maybe references internal data that reduces the likelihood of hallucination. If it's internal, what we're seeing is a lot of orgs will have also human in the loop type components where they can essentially, there's a human that's validating the accuracy and reliability of the model.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And, as you think about, or as you thought about, I'm sorry to build, but thought about building out the platform. I know kind of you've got some experience building AI. You've also got your co-founder, CTO, who has the kind of the technical side. Was it when you went to build the first version of the product, was it you two working on it, or did you bring in some other technical folks?
So, the very early prototypes was basically my co-founder sketching it out and using some very low fidelity mock-ups. That's actually how we ended up raising our first round. We had a very strong vision and perspective, but we're trying to solve a very big problem. And so it takes time to build a platform that's capable of serving the needs of enterprises, for sure. But we did, once we raised our first round, we did end up bringing some technical folks. We've got experts in AI and machine learning and some back-end, front-end engineers and policy experts as well. So we did end up, ultimately scaling the platform through kind of a traditional SaaS application. But I think, yes is the answer.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess it could all come at once, but I was curious if there's kind of this process, because you guys are dealing with a lot of data. And so is it a matter of, okay, well, let's make sure we get our data together first before we worry about, the front end. Let's make sure our predictions are correct, or do you kind of have to do all of that at once?
Funny enough, we actually use maybe less data than a lot of companies may think. It certainly is important to power some of our recommendation models, but I think we use a lot less data than you'd think. We do, I think per your note, I forgot to mention, we did bring in some external consultants on the UI UX side to help us design the platform. And I think they were fantastic. Pixels for Humans, great organization. They really helped understand the problem and the business problem that we were trying to solve, and really tailor, a UI UX that both reflected our values as a company and how we wanted to solve this problem, in addition to the types of features and pain points that customers wanted solved.
Yeah. And when so let's fast forward. Okay, we've got a working version, but then when you go to potential customers, is it that you say, hey, let's just try it out, right? Can we just try this out on your data? Like, what does that look like, just given the nature and the sensitivity of the data, and trying to break in as a startup into an organization who the company itself, maybe you yourself, has a past relationship, but Trustable itself is new, right? We're starting at zero.
Yeah, so I think even before customers use the platform, you want to make sure that you're solving for the right problems. So one of the first things that we did is we kind of treated this like a scientific model, where we created a series of hypotheses that we wanted tested and validated. So here are the things that we believe to be true, and we essentially validated them with customers, right? Is this true, or is it not? Or is it a big pain point, or is it not a big pain point? And then I think after we got that sense and validation from customers is when we started essentially coding and building stuff. So I think that was really important, and it allowed for us not to build before we knew what we were trying to solve for, which I think was really critical. Now that we built some Fidelity mockups on Figma and some others, once we had that and we felt that we knew what types of problems we were solving, we then went to actually coding the direct platform. So once the platform was actually, developed from an alpha or beta stage, we ran a beta process with, a bunch of companies. Many of them were publicly traded companies, and then some of them were smaller, mid-sized orgs. I think for the regulated publicly traded companies, what we end up seeing is that they didn't necessarily want to include like real data there necessarily, or real information. They wanted to provide test use cases and kind of see what the general outputs could look like. And I think this makes sense, right? We at the time, we didn't necessarily have the right cybersecurity or privacy protocols that would be sufficient for them. But I think what we needed was feedback. And so I preferred you to have an example use case with fake data that helped us understand how we needed to solve this problem versus trying to get to perfect, right?
Okay. Any insights because you mentioned bringing in a consulting group who's pretty good at the UI UX. And I think, adoption becomes a huge thing. Like, hey, look, your predictions are great, but then ultimately you still need for people to take action or even just pay attention. Were there any insights you've taken from that side, the UI UX side? And here's what we should do to make sure that there's actually adoption of our incredibly intelligent product.
Yeah, lots of it. So I think UI UX is actually going to be one of the most important components of our product strategy, because AI governance can get very complex very quickly. And if you don't have a platform that makes it very easy for organizations to know what they need to do, adoption goes down. So I think UI UX is certainly for us a competitive differentiator and something we want to really focus on. So I think a couple of the insights was, number one, it starts with the business problem that you're trying to solve. I've seen, some examples of companies building mockups without really knowing what type of customer pain point they're trying to solve for. I think that's really critical. And it really has to start with, what are you trying to solve for the customer, and working your way backwards. I think the second thing is that, there's a lot of great looking there's a lot of great looking software out there. There really is. And I think you have to also understand what industry you are serving and what persona within that industry you are serving. Because believe it or not, UI UX can actually be a differentiator. sometimes we sell into risk and compliance and legal personas that are used to using very antiquated software that doesn't adopt and adjust with their needs and, is clunky. And simply providing a better user interface and a better user experience can make their lives easier. So I think that needs to be a component of your product strategy. But I think, from our end, we also realized that we can't solve for everything. I think this has been one of the toughest challenges for us is we have such a grand vision for all the different things that we want to do, and just we're resource constrained. Why are we still a startup? And I think really prioritizing what needs to get built and what doesn't need to get built, that's oftentimes more art than science.
Yeah. And earlier we talked a little bit about model transparency rating as it relates to risks. I would love for you to kind of share more about, because I understand that's a new feature for you guys. Would love for you to explain more about what that is and ultimately why it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually came from customer insights. So we were talking to customers that were all of a sudden evaluating different large language models or generative AI applications, and they had 3 criteria by which they were evaluating them. Number 1, the performance on a given task. Number 2, the cost. And number 3, the risk. They understood the performance and the cost, but they have no idea how to evaluate the risk of these systems, because oftentimes these models are not transparent with respect to what data goes into them or how they're trained. And so we created what we call model transparency ratings. Think of them as the equivalent of like a credit rating or an ESG score for different large language models. We've evaluated 23 of the top LLMs against 30 different criteria of transparency. Do they disclose their data sources, their architecture, their training methodology, their licensing regime? All of this is mapped back to some of the requirements for the EU AI Act. And then we've given them scores, high, medium, low, to help orgs get a better understanding of what potential risks might be inherent in these models. We actually created a public website, aimodelratings.com, where you can actually go into it and interact with all the different models that we have. So we have GPT-4, Claude 3, Llama 3, 5.3, all the most recent Claude 3, all the most recent models. And you can kind of interact and understand the exact methodology that we use for our ratings.
Yeah. And with those ratings, I guess, is it a rank, or is it a fixed rank, I should say? Or is the rank of it, the rank of that LLM for an individual user who's going into this model transparency rating going to depend on what their use case is?
Gosh, great question. We struggled with giving this a numerical value or even like an alphabet, kind of like ABC type of situation, for a couple of reasons. I think number one, we're evaluating public transparency. So we don't necessarily have all of the private documentation that might exist on it. So giving a model an F on transparency, when in reality, maybe they do disclose it to a customer on a one-on-one basis, we're evaluating public transparency, right? But giving letter grading is oftentimes difficult. And we also don't want to be arbiters of what decisions customers should make. We want to be giving them information. So that's why we decided to move towards the high, medium, low kind of category or unknown category. In some cases, it's yes or no binary. In some cases, it's rating. We also candidly, I have no intention of, pissing off the hyperscalers or the large developers, right? I have no intention of doing that. I want to be able to give customers better information on how they may evaluate, different risk of these models. And so I think that was an important consideration for us as well.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess where I was trying to go with that question was, if I'm a fintech company, and then and on the other side, I am a marketing company, does the rating change depending on kind of the nature of my business?
So it's a great question. Pure model transparency ratings are model specific, not use case specific. So are these systems disclosing these types of information? Where that comes back into like the use case specific or the industry is in the other aspects of our platform, right? So the recommendations on potential risks based on so we have a risk assessment and different assessments that we kind of probe you to answer certain questions about the system. And that's where we'll give you different risks on your models or different things that you should be considering. So they are a little bit different. I mean, they're complementary, but they're, with respect to responsible AI governance, there could be risks at the organizational level, at the use case level, at the model level, or at the data level. And oftentimes think of these as supply chains, as development life cycles, orgs need to be cognizant that different risks can be introduced across the board.
Yeah, I can imagine it's super helpful. It sounds like virtually every organization is trying to figure out how they can implement large language models in their business in some, whether it be internally or externally, but in some shape, form, or fashion. How can we implement? And obviously the next question is, which one do we then go ahead and implement? Yeah. So what was it? Where can we find that again?
AImodelratings.com.
Okay, awesome. And then I kind of want to change gears here and talk about what the fundraising process has been like for you guys. Obviously, like AI was one of the few sectors that did see some growth in the past year from a fundraising perspective, whereas kind of the rest of tech was kind of SOL. Were there, as you thought about, what's been your fundraising journey? You talked a little bit about it earlier, but just do a little deeper dive into that. What's been the fundraising journey? And have you found a particular subset of investors, have the conversations gone better, and have they been more value added?
Yes. So I think we've raised 2.6 million to date. I think from our standpoint, there's two things. Number one, I think there's a lot of excitement around AI, certainly. And I think particularly investors that invest in enterprise software that have good relationships with enterprises and know the challenges that they're facing, I think are really excited about Trustable. And those are the types of investors that we love working with. I think there's one opportunity and thing that was personal to my experiences. As I mentioned, I'm originally from Puerto Rico, and we got a lot of love from folks that focus on Hispanic and investing in Hispanic and Latino entrepreneurs. So, my investors include Harlem Capital and Vamos Ventures and other angels that have really focused on providing opportunities to Hispanic entrepreneurs. And so I've been really lucky to have that network and be exposed to folks that are really supportive in that capacity. And they have themselves introduced me to other Hispanic entrepreneurs, to other Latino founders and executives that have been really helpful. I think the one thing that I will admit is a challenge, and I don't think this is specific to AI, but in the fundraising landscape, is that the success metrics have changed. That, right. Before you could raise seed rounds with no revenue, or you can have $500,000 or $1 million and raise your Series A. That's no longer the case. The goalpost has moved up. Even if you're a tremendous AI company founded by former blank execs, I think the requirements of stages have changed, and they're a little bit more murky. To give you an example, we're also seeing valuations for certain AI companies be candidly astronomical, and right around that Series A, Series B stage. And what you're seeing is that oftentimes Series C and Series D and Series E companies are not getting the multiples that you'd expect. And so what's happening is that Series A companies can sometimes be valued more than Series C or Series D companies, even though Series A might have a couple million in revenue and Series D might have 20 million in revenue, 40 million in revenue. And so I think there's these weird market dynamics that are happening in the fundraising environment that I think will probably level out over the next couple of years. But for us, I think the big lesson that I've learned is find folks that are really passionate about what you're doing, either sector specific or community specific, and build great relationships with those folks.
Yeah. And I think, before VC community, investment community, because I mean, it seems now that everyone's investing in AI as part of their thesis, and makes sense to do so. Before, though, if we think a few years back, there were firms with AI specific theses,
Absolutely.
You experienced investors asking more diligence questions to understand, is this AI or is this someone pretending that they've got AI, so we cut the check?
Oh gosh, man, I can get into hot water with that. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know the answer.
I'll keep you out the hot water.
Yeah.
Feel free to give the presidential answer.
I think one of my life mottos is assume positive intent. I presume that an investor that is investing millions or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on behalf of institutions is taking the right diligence steps to ensure that they are investing in the types of technologies that those companies are promoting. So I want to say yes, but I know for a fact that isn't necessarily happening across the board.
And I know we're coming up on time here, but I do want to leave a few minutes for, anything else coming up that you like to announce? You talked about the model transparency rating, but anything folks should keep an eye out for with Trustable? And then lastly, would love for you to kind of just point folks in the right direction. Folks who want to learn more about you, learn more about Trustable, where should they go?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the model transparency ratings is something we're really excited about. We started with large language models and will eventually expand into other types of AI models and other types of risk categories beyond transparency. So I think keep on the lookout for that. I think, my one maybe sales plug is, to the extent that you're looking to bring, these concepts of responsible AI into fruition, to the extent that your customers are asking questions about how your AI systems are built, or you're trying to understand what risks may exist from your vendors on AI, feel free to reach out to us, Trustable AI. And, we're happy to kind of have a conversation and see how we can be helpful. We're also, this is an early market category, which means there's a lot of market and customer education. So we have a newsletter that you can follow on Substack, Trustable AI on Substack. We're constantly publishing stuff in our Insights blog page, white papers, case studies, blog posts, and you can follow us on LinkedIn. We're also very active on LinkedIn. I'm trying to post 2 to 4 times a week on LinkedIn, post insights from customers, different techniques or new research that we see, and trying to, kind of be a collective voice in the responsible AI space.
Awesome. Well, yeah, excited about this market. Obviously, a lot of the regulation, as you're saying, is starting to come to fruition. It's starting to become more top of mind. So thanks for sharing as much as you have with us, and we look forward to keeping up with the progress with you and with Trustable.
Yeah, Darius, appreciate you having me, and I'm excited to hear it.
Absolutely.